The pregnancy test trembled in Elena Vasquez's hands as she stared at the two pink lines that would change everything. $7 million sat in her bank account, payment for carrying a stranger's child. But what she didn't know was that the billionaire who bought her womb had been watching her for months. And this wasn't just about an heir. 3 months earlier, Elena had sat in the oncology waiting room, watching her mother's frail hands shake as the doctor delivered the death sentence disguised as a diagnosis. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 6 months to live without treatment. 2 years with aggressive chemotherapy that would cost more money than Elena could earn in a lifetime. There are options, Dr. Martinez had said gently, but Elena heard what he didn't say. Options for people with money. Options for families who didn't clean office buildings at midnight and serve coffee at dawn just to keep the lights on. That night, scrolling through job listings on her cracked phone screen, Elena had found the advertisement that would seal her fate. Seeking healthy young women for surrogacy program. Compensation, $7,000. Discretion required. $7 million. Enough to save her mother's life and change everything. Now standing in the mahogany-paneled office that occupied an entire floor of the Cross Industries building, Elena faced the consequences of that desperate decision. The pregnancy test's plastic casing was slick with sweat from her nervous grip as she looked across the massive desk at the man who had purchased her body. Damian Cross didn't look up from his laptop when she entered. His dark hair was perfectly styled. His charcoal suit probably cost more than Elena's annual rent. Everything about him screamed power, control, untouchable wealth. The city sprawled beneath the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him like a conquered kingdom. "Mr. Cross?" Elena's voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "Sit." He gestured to the leather chair across from his desk without lifting his eyes from the screen. The blue light reflected off his sharp cheekbones, making him look carved from ice. Elena perched on the edge of the chair, the pregnancy test hidden in her purse. The office smelled of expensive cologne and leather, nothing like the antiseptic hospital rooms where she'd spent the last 3 months watching her mother fight for every breath. The preliminary tests were positive, I assume. Damien's fingers moved across the keyboard with mechanical precision. "Or you wouldn't be here." "Yes, Excellent. My lawyers will contact you about relocation. The estate has been prepared for your stay." He finally looked up, his steel gray eyes scanning her face with all the warmth of a medical examination. "Any questions should be directed to my assistant." Elena's throat felt tight. In all her desperate planning, all her careful budgeting of how the $7 million would save her mother and change their lives, she'd somehow forgotten that this moment would feel like selling her soul. "I need to know what happens now," she managed. "The contract mentions relocation, but it doesn't specify. You'll move to my estate in the Hamptons tomorrow. My staff will handle everything." Damien's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then back at her. "The medical team has been briefed on your care. You'll want for nothing." Nothing except freedom, Elena thought, but kept the words locked behind her teeth. The contract had been clear about the isolation requirements, the strict monitoring, the complete surrender of autonomy for the duration of the pregnancy. She'd signed it anyway, watching her mother's oxygen levels drop on the hospital monitor. "Mr. Cross, I understand this is business for you, but for me, Miss Vasquez," his voice cut through her words like glass, "this is exactly what it appears to be, a transaction. You provide a service, I provide compensation. Emotional complications serve no one." Before Elena could respond, the office door opened. A stunning blonde woman entered, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor with predatory precision. Her smile was sharp enough to cut diamonds. "Elena, isn't it?" The woman extended a perfectly manicured hand. "I'm Victoria Cross. I'll be overseeing your care during the pregnancy." Elena shook the offered hand, noting how Victoria's grip lingered just long enough to be uncomfortable. Her nails, painted crimson, pressed into Elena's palm like a warning. "Victoria handles the medical aspects of the program," Damien explained, his tone shifting to something almost warm when he looked at the blonde. "She's been instrumental in ensuring the success of our endeavor." "I'm sure we'll get along beautifully," Victoria purred, her blue eyes studying Elena with the intensity of a scientist examining a specimen. "After all, We both want what's best for Damien's future heir. Something in Victoria's tone made Elena's skin crawl. The way she emphasized future heir carried undertones Elena couldn't decipher, but her instincts, honed by years of navigating dangerous neighborhoods and predatory men, screamed warnings. I should go, Elena said, standing abruptly. My mother's expecting me. Of course, Victoria's smile widened. Family is so important. Give Rosa my regards. The treatments are going well, I trust? Elena's blood turned to ice. She'd never mentioned her mother's name to anyone connected with Cross Industries. The contract application had requested emergency contact information, but hearing her mother's name in Victoria's perfectly modulated voice felt like a threat. How do you... We're very thorough in our screening process, Victoria said smoothly. Background checks, medical histories, family situations. We need to ensure our surrogates are stable. Elena left the penthouse office with more questions than answers, Victoria's laughter following her into the elevator. She didn't see Damien watch her through the floor-to-ceiling windows as she crossed the street 40 stories below, or notice how his jaw clenched when Victoria placed a possessive hand on his shoulder. Phase 1 complete, Victoria murmured, her reflection ghost-like in the window glass. She has no idea what's really happening, does she? Damien's silence spoke volumes. In the glass, his expression was unreadable, but his hands had clenched into fists at his sides. The timeline remains unchanged? He asked finally. Oh yes. By the time she realizes the truth, it will be far too late. Victoria's smile was predatory, triumphant. 7 million was such a bargain, don't you think? For what we're really buying. As Elena disappeared into the Manhattan crowd below, neither of them noticed the figure watching from a building across the street. A young man with Damien's sharp features and worried eyes who'd been tracking Victoria's movements for months. Marcus Cross lowered his binoculars and reached for his phone. Elena Vasquez had just walked into a trap that had been 2 years in the making, and she had no idea that her signature on that contract had signed her death warrant. The Hamptons estate sprawled before Elena like something from a nightmare disguised as a fairy tale. Rolling green lawns stretched to the horizon, interrupted by marble fountains and perfectly manicured gardens. The main house rose like a monument to excess, white columns, soaring windows, and enough square footage to house a small village. Her new home was the East Wing, connected to the main house by a covered walkway lined with security cameras. Every amenity imaginable had been provided. A king-size bed with Egyptian cotton sheets, a marble bathroom larger than her old apartment, a sitting room with a view of the ocean, a golden cage with an ocean view. The kitchen is stocked with everything on your approved diet, announced Mrs. Pemberton, the head housekeeper. Her silver hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her motherly smile never quite reached her pale blue eyes. Mr. Cross has been very specific about your nutritional requirements. Elena nodded, exhaustion weighing on her shoulders like lead blankets. The move had been swift, clinical. A team of professionals had packed her few belongings while she said goodbye to her mother at the hospital. Rosa had been barely conscious, pumped full of morphine, but she'd gripped Elena's hand with surprising strength. Be careful, Mija, she'd whispered in Spanish. Something feels wrong. Now, surrounded by luxury she could never have imagined, Elena understood what her mother meant. Every beautiful detail felt like a chain. The windows didn't open more than a few inches. The doors required key cards she didn't possess. Even the garden paths were designed to funnel visitors away from certain areas of the estate. When will I see Mr. Cross? Elena asked as Mrs. Pemberton showed her the well-stocked library. The older woman's expression flickered. Just for a moment, but Elena caught it. Fear? Pity? Mr. Cross is very busy with his business interests. He'll call when needed. Mrs. Pemberton's voice carried forced cheerfulness. In the meantime, you have everything you could want. The pool, the tennis court, the spa facilities. Everything except freedom. That evening, Elena discovered her first glimpse of the estate's true nature. Unable to sleep in the enormous bed, she'd wandered the moonlit gardens, hoping fresh air might calm her racing thoughts. The baby, still barely a flutter in her belly, seemed to respond to her stress with increased movement. Following a stone path lined with roses, She found herself at what looked like an old greenhouse tucked away behind a stand of ancient oaks. Ivy covered the glass panels and rust streaked the metal frame. It looked abandoned, forgotten. The only imperfect thing she'd seen on the entire estate, the door was unlocked. Inside, beneath dust sheets and broken plant pots, Elena found the photographs. Dozens of them, arranged on makeshift tables like a macabre gallery. Pictures of women, different women, all pregnant, all bearing a striking resemblance to her. Her hands shook as she lifted each photograph. Dark hair, similar builds, the same vulnerable expression she'd seen in her own bathroom mirror. Each photo was dated, going back 5 years. Each woman was labeled with a name and a number. Sarah M., subject 1. Jennifer L., subject 2. Maria S., subject 3. The most recent was marked Lisa K., subject 7, failed. Failed. The word echoed in Elena's mind as she stared at a woman who could have been her twin sister. What did failed mean in this context? Failed to carry to term? Failed to comply with the program's demands? Or failed to survive? You weren't supposed to find those. Elena spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs. A young man stood in the greenhouse doorway, moonlight casting shadows across features that were unmistakably familiar. He had Damien's sharp cheekbones and intense eyes, but where Damien radiated cold control, this man's face was animated by something that looked like genuine concern. "Who are you?" Elena whispered, clutching the photographs against her chest. "Marcus Cross, Damien's younger brother." He stepped into the greenhouse, his movements careful and quiet. "And you're in more danger than you know." "What do you mean? This is just a surrogacy arrangement." "Is it?" Marcus pulled out his phone, the screen's glow illuminating his worried expression. "Look at this. Really, look at it." He showed her a medical report. Her medical report from the screening process. But this version contained information she'd never seen before. Genetic markers she couldn't pronounce, compatibility ratings that made no sense, and at the bottom a note that made her blood turn to ice. Subject exhibits rare Rh null blood type and optimal neurological baseline. Ideal candidate for Project Genesis. Recommend immediate implementation upon confirmation of pregnancy. "What is Project Genesis?" Elena's voice came out as barely a whisper. Marcus glanced toward the main house, its windows glowing like watching eyes in the darkness. "It's not about giving Damien an heir, it's about creating one. A genetically enhanced child with capabilities that shouldn't exist." The photographs slipped from Elena's numb fingers, scattering across the dusty floor. "That's impossible. Genetic enhancement is theoretical." "Not anymore. Victoria has been funding research for 3 years. Underground labs, black market scientists, human test subjects." Marcus's voice was tight with anger. "Those women in the photos? They weren't willing participants in the end. They were lab rats." Elena's legs felt weak. She sank onto an overturned plant pot, her mind reeling. But Damien doesn't know the full extent of what Victoria's doing. She's been feeding him carefully edited reports, making him think he's funding legitimate fertility research to ensure his heir is healthy and intelligent. Marcus knelt beside her, his eyes intense. He has no idea about the neural modifications, the experimental drugs, or what Victoria really plans to do with the babies. "Babies? Plural?" Marcus gestured at the scattered photographs. "None of the previous subjects survived the full treatment. Their bodies rejected the modifications, or the stress killed them, or..." He trailed off, but Elena could fill in the blanks. "Or Victoria killed them when they became inconvenient," she finished. "You're smarter than the others. That might keep you alive longer." Marcus checked his phone again. "But Victoria is escalating. The timeline has been moved up. Tomorrow they start the enhancement injections." Before Elena could process this information fully, footsteps crunched on the gravel path outside. Marcus grabbed her arm, pulling her behind a bank of old potting tables. Victoria appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 security guards Elena hadn't seen before. Their tactical gear and obvious weapons made them look more like military contractors than estate security. "Marcus, you know you're not supposed to be here," Victoria said, her voice carrying that same saccharine sweetness Elena remembered from the office. But in the moonlight, her smile looked predatory, hungry. "Just visiting," Marcus replied, standing slowly with his hands visible. "Wanted to see how our guest was settling in." Victoria's eyes found Elena crouched behind the tables. "And you, darling, missed your evening vitamins." Mrs. Pemberton was quite concerned. Vitamins. Elena remembered the small white pills Mrs. Pemberton had insisted she take with dinner, the way her thoughts had felt sluggish afterward, wrapped in cotton. "I'm sorry," Elena said, forcing her voice to sound steady. "I couldn't sleep." "The garden is beautiful." "Yes, it is. But wandering alone at night isn't safe. There are so many ways to get lost." Victoria's meaning was crystal clear. "Marcus, I think it's time you return to the city. Your brother won't be pleased if he finds out about these late-night visits." Marcus looked at Elena one last time, his eyes conveying a message she couldn't quite read. "Be careful who you trust," he said simply. As he disappeared into the darkness, Victoria's smile widened. "Don't mind him. Marcus has always been prone to fantasies, too much imagination, too little real-world experience." She gestured to the guards, who moved to Elena's sides like bookends. "Now, let's get you back to the house. You need your rest." Victoria's tone was maternal, concerned. "Tomorrow we begin the next phase of your care. Special vitamins, enhanced nutrition, targeted therapies to ensure your baby develops perfectly." Elena allowed herself to be escorted back to her wing, but her mind raced with Marcus's warnings. The photographs, the medical reports, the ominous word "failed," written across so many faces that looked like her own. As Mrs. Pemberton brought her the evening vitamins, 3 pills instead of the usual one, Elena palmed them instead of swallowing. For the first time since signing the contract, she was thinking clearly, and what she saw terrified her. She wasn't just carrying Damien's child, she was carrying Victoria's experiment. And if the photographs were any indication, she was running out of time to save both their lives. 3 weeks into her stay at the estate, Elena's world had narrowed to a carefully orchestrated routine. Morning vitamins with breakfast, afternoon vitamins with lunch, evening vitamins with dinner. Blood draws twice weekly. Wellness consultations with Dr. Harrison, a thin man with cold hands who asked invasive questions and took detailed notes. The vitamins made her compliant, drowsy, willing to accept the increasingly restrictive boundaries of her captivity. Meals delivered to her room, exercise limited to supervised walks in a specific section of the garden, phone calls monitored and eventually discontinued altogether when Elena asked too many questions about her mother's treatment. But tonight, she'd only pretended to swallow the pills, hiding them under her tongue until Mrs. Pemberton left, then spitting them into a tissue. For the first time in weeks, her mind felt sharp, clear, terrifyingly alert. The main house connected to her wing through a service corridor she discovered during one of her drug wanderings. At 2 a.m., with the estate wrapped in silence, Elena crept through the shadows toward voices filtering from Damien's study. "The genetic modifications are taking hold perfectly," Dr. Harrison's clinical voice reported through the crack in the door. "Fetal development is exceeding all projections. Neural pathway enhancement is at 300% of baseline human parameters." Elena's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Neural pathway enhancement. They were experimenting on her baby's developing brain. "And the mother?" That was Victoria's voice, smooth as silk over steel. "Responding excellently to the neural inhibitors. Memory formation is significantly impaired, and compliance levels remain optimal. She suspects nothing." "Good." Damien's voice, but wrong somehow. Too cold, too controlled, lacking the business-like distance she remembered from their first meeting. "How long until we know if the telepathic enhancement succeeded?" Elena's legs nearly gave out. Telepathic enhancement. They weren't just trying to make her baby smarter. They were trying to create something that wasn't entirely human. "Another month for preliminary indicators. Full manifestation won't be measurable until after birth." Dr. Harrison's papers rustled. "However, I should mention that the subject's blood work shows some concerning anomalies." "What kind of anomalies?" Victoria's tone sharpened. "Rejection markers. Her immune system appears to be fighting the modifications more aggressively than previous subjects. We may need to increase the inhibitor dosage or consider more direct interventions? Elena pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure they'd hear it. Previous subjects. The women in the photographs, the ones marked failed. That won't be necessary, Victoria said smoothly. I've already made preparations for the final phase. Which is, Damien asked. Insurance, to ensure our investment is protected, regardless of any complications with the mother. Elena backed away from the door, but her movement triggered a floorboard creak that sounded like thunder in the silent hallway. What was that? Victoria's voice carried immediate suspicion. Elena ran. Through the service corridor, back to her wing, diving into bed fully clothed just as footsteps echoed in the outer hallway. She forced her breathing to slow, her body to relax, mimicking the drugged sleep Victoria expected to find. Mrs. Pemberton's keycard beeped, and the housekeeper entered quietly, checking on her supposedly sleeping charge. Elena remained motionless until the footsteps retreated and the door clicked shut. Only then did she allow herself to process what she'd overheard. Neural modifications, telepathic enhancement, previous subjects who had failed and disappeared. She needed help. She needed Marcus. The next morning, Elena played her role perfectly. Groggy, compliant, grateful for the increased vitamin dosage Mrs. Pemberton insisted would support the baby's rapid development. She palmed the pills again, but this time she counted them. 7 pills instead of the usual 3. They were escalating just as Marcus had warned. During her supervised garden walk, Elena pretended to admire the roses while scanning for security cameras. The estate was watched from every angle, but she'd noticed that the old greenhouse sat in a blind spot created by the ancient oaks. That night, she made her way back to the abandoned building. Marcus was waiting. You came, he said, relief evident in his voice. They're drugging me, experimenting on my baby. Elena's words tumbled out in a desperate rush. Neural enhancement, telepathic abilities. It sounds insane, but I heard them talking. Marcus nodded grimly. It's not insane. It's Victoria's obsession. He pulled out a tablet, showing her financial records, scientific papers, photographs of underground laboratories. She's been planning this for 3 years, ever since Damien divorced her. Divorced her? Elena stared at him. But she said she was his business partner. Victoria is Damien's ex-wife. He left her when he discovered she couldn't have children naturally. Marcus's jaw tightened. She's been systematically destroying his life ever since, and this project is her masterpiece of revenge. Elena sank onto a dusty workbench, overwhelmed. But why the charade? If she wanted revenge, why not just... Because she needs him to fund it, and she needs his genetic material for the experiments. Marcus sat beside her. Damien thinks he's funding legitimate research to ensure his heir is healthy and intelligent. He has no idea about the modifications, the previous subjects, or what Victoria really plans to do with the baby. What does she plan? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. To take the child after birth and disappear. Let Damien spend the rest of his life knowing he lost the enhanced heir he sacrificed everything to create. The cruelty of it took Elena's breath away. And me? You were never supposed to survive the birth. Elena's hands instinctively covered her belly. The other women died during the procedures or were killed when they became problematic. Marcus's voice was flat, matter of fact. Victoria has been perfecting her methods with each attempt. You're the closest she's come to success. Then we have to stop her. We? Marcus looked at her with something like admiration. Elena, this isn't your fight. I can get you out of here tonight. Disappear you somewhere safe. And leave Victoria to try again with another woman? Another baby? Elena stood, surprising herself with her own determination. No, this ends here. Before Marcus could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the estate. Security lights flooded the gardens, turning night into harsh, artificial day. Victoria's voice echoed over the intercom system, no longer bothering with false sweetness. Code red. Secure the subject. Find Marcus Cross. Elena realized with growing horror that their conversation had been monitored. Hidden microphones, concealed cameras. Victoria's surveillance was more complete than they'd imagined. Run, Marcus urged, but it was too late. Security guards surrounded the greenhouse, automatic weapons trained on both of them. These weren't estate security. They moved with military precision, faces hidden behind tactical masks. Victoria appeared in the doorway, no longer the perfectly groomed socialite. Her hair was disheveled, her designer clothes wrinkled, but her eyes blazed with triumphant madness. "Did you really think you could outmaneuver me?" she asked, stepping over broken glass and scattered photographs. "I've been planning this for years. Every contingency, every possible betrayal." She gestured to the guards, who grabbed Marcus roughly, zip-tying his hands behind his back. "Elena, darling, you've been such a disappointment. All that potential, wasted on sentiment and moral qualms." Victoria circled her like a predator studying wounded prey. "But don't worry, the final procedure will ensure your complete cooperation." "What final procedure?" Victoria's smile was genuinely terrifying. "Brain surgery, selective lobotomy to ensure maternal compliance during the birth process. You'll be conscious enough to deliver the baby, but not enough to interfere with my plans afterward." Elena's world tilted. They weren't just going to experiment on her baby, they were going to destroy her mind to do it. "Tomorrow morning, bright and early," Victoria continued, "Dr. Harrison is quite excited about the surgical challenge." As the guards dragged both Elena and Marcus toward the main house, Elena caught sight of something that made her heart race with desperate hope. Marcus's phone, fallen and forgotten in the struggle, was still recording everything Victoria had said. Somewhere out there, someone would know the truth. The question was whether help would arrive before Victoria's final procedure turned Elena into a mindless vessel for her revenge. The underground laboratory beneath the mansion was a nightmare of chrome and glass. Elena found herself strapped to an examination table that looked more like a medieval torture device, electrodes attached to her temples. The sterile white walls were lined with monitors showing her vital signs, brain activity, and most disturbingly, real-time ultrasound images of her baby. Through the observation window, she could see Marcus being held by armed guards. His face was swollen from the beating they'd given him, but his eyes remained defiant, locked on hers with an intensity that somehow gave her strength. Victoria entered wearing surgical scrubs, followed by Dr. Harrison and a team of technicians Elena didn't recognize. Their faces were hidden behind surgical masks, but their movements were efficient, practiced. They'd done this before. "Please," Elena begged, testing the restraints that held her wrists and ankles. "Don't hurt my baby." "Hurt?" Victoria laughed, checking the monitors that displayed Elena's racing heartbeat. "Sweetheart, I'm going to make your child into a god, the first of a new species of human. Too bad you won't be mentally present to appreciate the miracle." Dr. Harrison prepared a syringe filled with a fluid that seemed to shift colors in the harsh laboratory lights. "The neural restructuring compound will complete the final phase of enhancement while simultaneously beginning the lobotomy process." Very elegant, really. Elena watched in horror as he approached the IV line in her arm. In minutes, they would pump her full of chemicals that would destroy her mind and transform her baby into something monstrous. "Wait." A new voice cut through the room like a blade. Damien stood in the laboratory doorway, his face a mask of controlled rage Elena had never seen before. Behind him were men in FBI jackets, their weapons drawn. "Step away from her, now." Victoria's composure cracked for the first time since Elena had known her. "Damien, how did you—" "Marcus contacted the FBI 3 days ago. We've been monitoring everything." His steel gray eyes found Elena's across the room, and she saw something there she'd never noticed before. Genuine horror at what had been done to her. "The real question is why my ex-wife has been conducting illegal human experiments using my resources." "You don't understand," Victoria snarled, her mask of sanity finally slipping completely. This child could be the next step in human evolution. Enhanced intelligence, telepathic abilities, accelerated healing. This child is an innocent life you've been poisoning with experimental drugs. Damien moved into the lab, flanked by FBI agents. "Agent Torres, arrest Dr. Harrison and his team. Victoria Cross is wanted on charges of human trafficking, illegal medical experimentation, attempted murder, and conspiracy." Dr. Harrison dropped the syringe, raising his hands as agents surrounded him. But Victoria wasn't finished. "You destroyed everything," she screamed at Damien, her perfectly styled facade crumbling into raw hatred. Our marriage, my chance at motherhood, my place in society, this baby was supposed to fix it all. By turning it into a laboratory experiment, Damien began working on Elena's restraints, his hands surprisingly gentle. You're completely insane. Insane? Victoria grabbed a scalpel from the instrument tray, her eyes wild with desperate fury. If I can't have the perfect child, no one can. She lunged toward Elena's exposed abdomen, the blade aimed at the life growing inside her. Elena screamed, but Damien was faster. He tackled Victoria, and they went down together in a tangle of limbs and violence. The scalpel clattered away across the sterile floor as they struggled with desperate intensity. You destroyed my life, Victoria shrieked, clawing at Damien's face with her fingernails. Your family, our future, my chance at being a mother. By kidnapping and torturing innocent women? Damien pinned her thrashing arms. You're a monster. The FBI agents separated them, cuffing Victoria as she continued ranting about genetic destiny and evolutionary leaps. Her designer scrubs were torn, her hair disheveled, her face twisted with years of accumulated hatred and obsession. Dr. Harrison, also in custody, looked at Elena with the cold detachment of a scientist observing a failed experiment. The neural modifications are irreversible now. Even without completing the enhancement process, that child will never be completely normal. Elena's world spun. Even saved from Victoria's immediate threat, her baby would carry the consequences of these experiments forever. The drugs, the procedures, the genetic tampering, all of it was already done, permanently altering the life she tried so hard to protect. Damien knelt beside the examination table, his hands shaking as he removed the remaining restraints and electrodes. Elena, I'm so sorry. I had no idea what she was doing to you. What happens to my baby now? Elena whispered, her voice hoarse from screaming. Will it be normal? Dr. Harrison's clinical assessment hung in the air like a death sentence. Her child would be forever marked by Victoria's madness, carrying genetic modifications that couldn't be undone, neural enhancements that might manifest in unpredictable ways. But as Elena sat up slowly, supported by Damien's steadying hands, she felt something that cut through all her terror and despair. Her baby was moving, strong and healthy, responding to the sound of her voice with kicks that felt like defiant little declarations of life. Agent Torres approached with a blanket, wrapping it around Elena's shoulders. We'll get you to a hospital immediately. Our medical team will run comprehensive tests to determine the full extent of the modifications. As the FBI led Victoria away in handcuffs, still raving about perfect children and evolutionary destiny, Elena caught her eye one last time. The woman who had orchestrated months of torture and experimentation looked small now, diminished. Her grand plans reduced to the desperate ravings of someone who had lost everything in pursuit of revenge. This isn't over, Victoria hissed as the agents forced her toward the exit. That child will never be normal. Every day for the rest of your life, you'll wonder what I made it into. But Elena wasn't listening anymore. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the strong movements of the life inside her. Whatever Victoria had tried to do, whatever modifications had or hadn't taken hold, this was still her baby, still her choice to make. Get me out of here, she told Damien quietly. As they helped her from the laboratory, Elena couldn't shake Dr. Harrison's words. The experiments were irreversible. Her child would carry Victoria's mark forever, in ways they might not discover for years. The question was no longer whether her baby would be normal. The question was what she would do to love and protect it, regardless of what Victoria's obsession had made it become. 1 week after Victoria's arrest, Elena sat in a private medical facility where Dr. Sarah Chen, a geneticist untainted by Project Genesis, delivered news that shattered everything they thought they knew about the past 3 months. I've analyzed your blood work, the fetal development scans, and every sample Dr. Harrison's team collected, Dr. Chen said, spreading the results across her desk like pieces of a puzzle Elena couldn't solve. The modifications he claimed to have made, they never took hold. Elena stared at the genetic sequence printouts, the brain scan images, the detailed reports that might as well have been written in ancient Greek for all she could understand them. What do you mean? Your body rejected them completely. Every single one. Dr. Chen pulled up side-by-side comparisons on her computer monitor. The neural inhibitors were real. That's why you felt drowsy and compliant for weeks. But the genetic enhancements, the neural pathway modifications, the telepathic development, your immune system fought them off like they were poison. Damien, who'd insisted on being present for every medical appointment since the rescue, leaned forward in his chair. That's impossible. Harrison's research showed clear evidence of genetic integration. Harrison's research was fabricated. Dr. Chen's voice carried barely contained anger. Look at these cellular markers, these DNA sequences. There's no evidence of any genetic modification in either the maternal or fetal samples. Your ex-wife was injecting Elena with expensive placebos while feeding you falsified data. Elena felt the room spinning around her. So my baby is normal, completely healthy, and genetically unmodified. Whatever Victoria Cross was planning, it had nothing to do with creating an enhanced child. Dr. Chen turned her monitor toward them, highlighting normal genetic markers, typical brain development patterns, standard fetal growth curves. This was about something else entirely. That evening in the safe house the FBI had arranged while Victoria awaited trial, Elena confronted the man who'd turned her life upside down with a $7 million contract that was supposed to be simple surrogacy. Why me, Damien? Out of all the women in the world, why did you choose me for this nightmare? He sat across from her in the small living room, looking more human than she'd ever seen him. Gone was the cold businessman who'd barely looked up from his laptop during their first meeting. In his place was a man haunted by guilt, responsibility, and something that looked almost like genuine care. I didn't choose you, he said quietly, his voice rough with exhaustion. Victoria did. What? The entire surrogacy program was her idea from the beginning. She approached me 6 months after our divorce, claiming she'd developed a revolutionary fertility treatment that would ensure my heir was healthy, intelligent, genetically superior. Damien ran his hands through his dark hair, which had lost its perfect styling sometime during the FBI raid. She handled all the screening processes, all the candidate selection, all the medical protocols. Elena felt pieces of a horrifying puzzle clicking into place. She chose women who looked like her. All brunette, similar builds, same general facial structure, all with rare blood types that would make them suitable for the experimental procedures she never actually intended to perform. His steel gray eyes met hers, filled with regret that seemed to go bone deep. I was so consumed with building a legacy, with proving I could create something perfect without her, that I didn't ask the right questions. But why the elaborate charade? If she knew the genetic modifications wouldn't work, because she needed me to believe the child would be special, worth the enormous investment, worth fighting for, worth sacrificing everything to obtain. Damien's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Her real plan was to take the baby after birth, disappear with my genetic heir, and let me spend the rest of my life knowing I'd lost the child I'd paid millions to create. The cruelty of it stole Elena's breath. Victoria had been playing them both, using Elena's desperate love for her dying mother and Damien's obsessive need for a perfect legacy as pawns in an elaborate revenge fantasy that had taken years to orchestrate. There's more, Damien continued, pulling out a thick folder Agent Torres had given them. Marcus found financial records showing Victoria has been planning this operation for over 2 years. The other women in the photographs, Sarah, Jennifer, Maria, Lisa, they didn't fail experimental procedures. Elena's throat constricted. What happened to them? Staged accidents, untraceable poisonings, drug overdoses in cities hundreds of miles from the estate. His jaw tightened with barely controlled anger. Once Victoria realized the genetic modifications wouldn't work on any of them, and that she couldn't maintain the illusion of success indefinitely, she eliminated the evidence and moved on to the next subject. The room felt too small, too hot. Elena struggled to breathe as the full scope of Victoria's plan became clear. She hadn't just been a surrogate. She'd been marked for death the moment she signed the contract. Her mother's cancer treatment, her financial desperation, her willingness to do anything to save the woman who'd raised her alone, all of it had made her the perfect victim. You would have been number 8, Damien said quietly, but something went wrong with her timeline. Elena's voice sounded distant to her own ears. That's why Marcus got involved. Marcus has been tracking Victoria's activities since our divorce. He knew she was planning something catastrophic but couldn't prove it until the surrogacy program started. Damien looked directly at her, his expression more open than she'd ever seen it. He's been trying to protect you from the very beginning, even when I was too blind to see what was really happening. Elena's baby chose that moment to kick vigorously, as if responding to the emotional tension in the room. She pressed her hand to the spot, feeling the strong, healthy movements that Dr. Chen's tests had confirmed were completely normal. All those months of terror, she whispered, thinking my baby was being turned into some kind of enhanced creature, that I was carrying a monster? You were carrying exactly what you thought you were carrying from the beginning. A healthy, normal child conceived through standard artificial insemination. Damien hesitated, then reached out tentatively to touch her hand. Elena, I know I can never undo the fear, the isolation, the months of not knowing if you or the baby would survive. But I want you to know. A sharp knock at the door cut him off. Agent Torres entered, her expression grim in a way that made Elena's stomach clench with familiar dread. We have a problem, Torres announced without preamble. Victoria Cross escaped federal custody 3 hours ago. Elena's blood turned to ice. How is that possible? Inside help, someone with high-level clearance arranged a prisoner transport that was supposedly routine medical care. Torres looked between Elena and Damien with professional concern. The transport was ambushed by a team of mercenaries. 2 federal agents are dead, and Victoria disappeared with professional extraction efficiency. Elena's baby kicked harder, as if sensing the renewed danger. What does this mean? It means Victoria has resources and planning capabilities we severely underestimated. Torres consulted her tablet. She left a message through an encrypted channel, said the final act is about to begin, and this time, she won't be interrupted by federal interference. Damien stood abruptly, his businesslike composure snapping back into place. What kind of resources are we talking about? Offshore accounts, private military contractors, safe houses in non-extradition countries. Torres's expression was grim. Your ex-wife has been preparing for this contingency for months, maybe years. This wasn't a desperate escape. This was a planned operation. Elena struggled to process this new nightmare. Just when she'd learned that her baby was safe, that the experiments had failed, that Victoria's grand plan had been nothing but elaborate theater. The woman herself was free, more dangerous than ever, and apparently far from finished with her revenge. What does she want now? Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The same thing she's always wanted, Torres replied. You, the baby, and Damien's complete destruction. The difference is, now she has nothing left to lose. Outside, as storm clouds gathered on the horizon, and Elena realized that despite all the revelations, all the truth, their nightmare was entering its final, most dangerous phase. Victoria Cross was free, backed by professional killers and fueled by years of accumulated hatred, and she was coming for them all. Victoria struck at dawn with the precision of a military operation. Elena woke to the sound of automatic gunfire echoing through the safe house, followed by Agent Torres shouting commands into her radio. Smoke began filtering under the bedroom door as Elena struggled to orient herself in the gray morning light. Elena! Damien's voice cut through the chaos. He appeared in her doorway, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead where flying glass had caught him. His usually perfect shirt was torn, his hair disheveled, but his eyes held the same steel determination she'd seen during Victoria's arrest. We have to go. Now. Elena grabbed the emergency bag Dr. Chen had insisted she pack. Prenatal vitamins, copies of her medical records, the burner phone Agent Torres had given her for worst-case scenarios. As they rushed toward the rear exit, she caught a glimpse through the front window of figures in black tactical gear, surrounding the building with professional efficiency. How did she find us? Elena gasped as Damien led her through a narrow service corridor the FBI had shown them during their security briefing. Money buys loyalty from people who should know better, he replied grimly, his hands steady on her back as they navigated the darkened hallway. Victoria's had years to build networks, compromise officials, plan contingencies. They emerged through a concealed exit into the neighboring yard, where Marcus waited beside a nondescript sedan that looked like every other car in the suburban neighborhood. His face was pale but determined, and Elena noticed his hands were shaking slightly as he helped her into the back seat. "Torres and her team?" Marcus asked as Damien took the driver's seat. "Still inside, holding them off. She said to get Elena to safety and not look back." Damien started the engine, pulling away from the safe house as smoothly as if they were leaving for a casual morning drive. Only the tight line of his jaw betrayed the tension. As they drove through the pre-dawn streets, Elena felt her baby moving restlessly inside her, responding to her elevated heart rate and stress hormones. She pressed her hands to her belly, whispering reassurances she didn't believe while watching the rear window for signs of pursuit. "Where can we go that she won't find us?" Elena asked, voicing the question they were all thinking. "Nowhere," Marcus said from the front seat, his voice flat with realistic assessment. "Victoria has resources we're only beginning to understand. Private investigators, corrupt officials, military contractors. But there is one place she might not expect us to go." An hour later, they pulled up to a modest single-story house in a working-class neighborhood Elena recognized with a mixture of relief and terror. Her childhood home, where her mother was recovering from the cancer treatments that had started this entire nightmare. "Mom?" Elena called as they entered the small living room that somehow looked even smaller after months in Victoria's opulent estate. Rosa Vasquez appeared from the kitchen, her face lighting up at the sight of her daughter before quickly clouding with maternal concern as she took in the blood on Damien's clothes, the tension radiating from all three of them, and Elena's obvious distress. "Mija, what's happening? You look terrible." Elena collapsed into her mother's arms, the careful composure she'd maintained through months of captivity and experimentation finally cracking under the weight of renewed terror. Between sobs that shook her entire body, she told Rosa everything: the contract, the fake experiments, Victoria's true plan, the escape, the murders of other women, and now the renewed hunt that had brought danger to their doorstep. Rosa listened in horrified silence, her work-worn hands stroking Elena's hair the way she had when Elena was small and afraid of thunderstorms. When the story was finished, she fixed Damien with a stare that could have melted steel at 50 paces. "You did this to my daughter?" "Mom, he didn't know." "I don't care what he knew or didn't know." Rose's English carried the weight of every sacrifice she'd made as a single mother, working 3 jobs to keep food on the table. "He bought my child like she was property. He put her in danger. And now this woman wants to kill her?" Damien met her furious gaze without flinching, accepting the full force of her maternal rage. "Mrs. Vasquez, I know I can never undo the harm I've caused Elena, but I swear to you on everything I hold sacred, I will protect her and her baby with my life." "Their baby," Rosa corrected sharply, "not yours. Theirs." The correction hit Damien like a physical blow. In all his planning for a perfect heir, all his obsession with genetic legacy and corporate succession, he'd somehow forgotten the most basic truth. Elena wasn't just carrying his biological contribution to the next generation. She was carrying her own child, a person who would be part of her family regardless of DNA or contracts or the circumstances of conception. Marcus, who'd been monitoring news feeds and law enforcement channels on his encrypted phone, looked up with new alarm. "We have a bigger problem. Victoria just made a public statement." He turned the phone screen toward them. Victoria stood before a carefully arranged backdrop of concerned reporters, looking perfectly composed despite being a fugitive from federal custody. Her blonde hair was styled to perfection, her makeup flawless, her expression a masterpiece of wounded innocence. "My ex-husband Damien Cross has kidnapped a pregnant woman and her unborn child," she declared with the kind of righteous fury that would play perfectly on the evening news. "This innocent young woman signed a surrogacy contract in good faith, but when she tried to leave the program due to concerns about illegal medical procedures, he had her forcibly detained and subjected to experimental treatments." Elena watched in horror as Victoria spun their entire story, casting herself as the would-be rescuer and Damien as the villain who'd orchestrated everything. "I have extensive evidence of a human trafficking operation masquerading as a legitimate surrogacy program," Victoria continued, her voice breaking with perfectly calculated emotion. Elena Vasquez is being held against her will by a man who sees her only as a vessel for his obsession with genetic perfection. Her baby's life is in immediate danger. The camera zoomed in on Victoria's face, capturing what looked like genuine tears. I'm offering a $10 million reward for information leading to Elena Vasquez's safe return. This young woman and her unborn child are innocent victims of a man whose obsession with genetic manipulation has driven him to unspeakable acts. The news anchor's voice continued over footage of the safe house raid. Federal authorities confirm that Ms. Vasquez is missing, along with Damian Cross and his brother Marcus. Victoria Cross, who was being held on related charges, was reportedly being transported to a federal facility when her convoy was attacked by unknown assailants. Rosa turned off the TV with a sharp click. She's turned the whole world against you. Worse than that, Marcus said, scrolling through social media feeds where Victoria's story was already trending. She's made Elena a target. Every bounty hunter, desperate person, and wannabe hero in the country will be looking for her now. $10 million is enough to motivate a lot of people to ask questions later. Elena sank into her mother's old recliner, the same chair where Rosa had received her cancer diagnosis, where Elena had made the desperate decision to sign Victoria's contract. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was back where it all started, but now the danger was exponentially worse. What do we do? She whispered, feeling her baby kick in response to her stress. Damien knelt beside her chair, his gray eyes holding a dangerous glint she'd never seen before. We end this. Tonight. How? By giving Victoria exactly what she wants. He stood, pacing to the window to check the quiet street outside. A face-to-face meeting with me. Elena grabbed his arm. That's suicide. She'll kill you the moment she sees you. Maybe, but it's the only way to draw her attention away from you and give the FBI time to track her real location. He covered her hand with his, and Elena was surprised by the steadiness of his touch. Marcus can get you and your mother to a truly secure location, while Victoria is focused on destroying me. No. Elena's voice was stronger than she felt. We're not separating. That's exactly what she wants. To isolate us, pick us off one by one. Elena's right, Marcus said, looking up from his phone. Victoria's too smart to fall for a simple distraction. She knows we're together, knows we'll protect each other. Splitting up just makes us easier targets. Rosa, who'd been listening quietly from the kitchen doorway, stepped forward. There's something you're all forgetting. They turned to look at her, this small woman who'd raised Elena alone while working multiple jobs and fighting her own battle with cancer. This Victoria, Rosa continued, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. She's been planning this for years, yes? She has money, connections, professional killers? Yes, Damien said carefully, but she's also completely loca, crazy. Rosa tapped her temple. Obsessed people make mistakes. They get tunnel vision. They forget that regular people, people like us, we survive by being smart, not by being rich. Before anyone could respond, Elena heard it. The soft sound of car doors closing on the quiet residential street. Multiple vehicles positioned too strategically to be coincidental. Marcus was already at the window peering through the curtains. 3 vehicles, professional spacing. They found us. Elena's baby seemed to sense the renewed danger, kicking frantically as if trying to escape the womb that had become a target. She pressed both hands to her belly, whispering apologies to the child who'd never asked to be born into this nightmare. Back exit? Damien asked tersely. Blocked, Marcus reported, checking the rear window. We're surrounded. Rosa walked calmly to the front door, smoothing her graying hair and straightening her simple house dress. Then we don't run. Mom, no! I said we don't run, but I didn't say we don't fight. Rosa's smile was fierce, proud, nothing like the frail cancer patient Elena remembered from the hospital. This is my house, my neighborhood, my daughter. A soft knock echoed through the small living room, polite, almost gentle, completely at odds with the tactical assault team surrounding the house. Victoria's voice carried through the door, sweet as poison honey. I know you're all in there. Let's talk like civilized people, shall we? Elena felt the walls of her childhood home closing in around her, But for the first time in months, she wasn't entirely afraid. She was angry. Angry at the months of manipulation, the drugs that had clouded her mind, the experimental procedures that could have killed her baby, the other women who hadn't been lucky enough to survive Victoria's obsession. "What do you want, Victoria?" Damien called out, positioning himself between Elena and the door. "What I've always wanted, justice." Victoria's voice hardened like steel beneath silk. "You destroyed my life, Damien. My marriage, my chance at motherhood, my place in the world. Now I'm returning the favor." Elena stood slowly, ignoring Damien's restraining gesture. She walked to the front door, her hand resting protectively on her belly. "Victoria," she called through the door, "this is between you and Damien. Let me walk away with my baby, and you can have whatever justice you think you deserve." A pause. When Victoria spoke again, the false sweetness was completely gone, replaced by naked hunger. "Oh, sweetheart, you still don't understand, do you?" Victoria's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "This was never about justice. This was never about Damien. This was about taking everything he values and making it mine." The truth hit Elena like ice water. Victoria didn't want revenge. She wanted possession. The baby, Elena herself, even Damien's destruction were all just trophies in a game that had started years before Elena had ever heard of Cross Industries. "You want my baby," Elena said quietly. "I want what should have been mine from the beginning. A child to raise, to mold, to love on my terms." Victoria's voice turned almost tender, which made it infinitely more terrifying. "Damien took that possibility away when he divorced me. But you've given me a second chance." Elena looked back at the people who'd become her chosen family. Damien with his protective stance and haunted eyes. Marcus with his quiet courage and steady loyalty. Her mother with her fierce love and survivor's strength. They were all prepared to die for a baby that might not even be biologically related to half of them. But Elena was done being protected, done being a victim, done allowing Victoria's obsession to control all their lives. "Come in," she called out. "Let's finish this." "Elena," Damien started. "No." Elena's voice carried an authority that surprised everyone, including herself. "She's right about one thing. This has to end. Tonight." Outside, she heard Victoria's genuine laughter for the first time. Not calculated or performed, but filled with real delight. "Finally," Victoria said, "someone with sense. Open the door, darling. Let's discuss the terms of your surrender." As Elena reached for the door handle, she felt her baby kick one last time. Strong, defiant, very much alive. Whatever happened next, she was going to make sure it stayed that way. Elena opened the door to find Victoria standing alone on the small front porch, her hands visible and empty. She looked elegant even in tactical gear. Her blonde hair perfect despite the pre-dawn operation, her smile warm as if she were making a social call rather than concluding a deadly game of cat and mouse. "There's my girl," Victoria said, stepping uninvited into Rose's living room. Her pale blue eyes swept the space, taking in the modest furniture, the family photographs on the mantel, the profound ordinariness of Elena's childhood home. How wonderfully authentic. Damien moved to Elena's side, but Victoria held up a warning hand. Now, let's keep this civilized." She gestured toward the windows, where Elena could see the silhouettes of armed figures positioned around the house. "I have a dozen professionals who would be very unhappy if anyone made sudden movements." "What do you want, Victoria?" Elena asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Honestly, I want a lot of things." Victoria settled herself gracefully into Rose's favorite armchair, making herself completely at home. "I want Damien to suffer the way I suffered when he abandoned me. I want the child you're carrying, and I want you to understand that everything that's happened, every moment of fear, every sleepless night, every drug-hazed day at the estate, has been leading to this moment." Rosa emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray with coffee and her best cups, as if Victoria were an expected guest rather than a dangerous fugitive. "Coffee," she offered politely. Victoria blinked, clearly thrown off balance by this display of mundane hospitality in the middle of a hostage situation. Yes, thank you." As Rosa served coffee with the calm efficiency of someone who'd hosted thousands of neighbors and church members in the same living room. Elena began to understand her mother's strategy. Victoria thrived on drama, on fear, on the power that came from controlling other people's terror. Ordinary courtesy was the one thing she hadn't planned for. "You have a lovely home," Victoria said to Rosa, accepting the coffee cup with automatic politeness. "Thank you. I raised Elena here." Rosa's smile was gentle, grandmotherly. "Would you like to see her baby pictures? I have albums." The surreal domesticity of the moment seemed to drain some of the menace from Victoria's presence. She was still dangerous, still backed by professional killers, but Rosa's relentless normalcy was forcing her to engage as a person rather than a predator. "Actually," Victoria said, regaining her composure, "I'd prefer to discuss the future rather than the past." "Of course." Rosa settled into her own chair, sipping her coffee as if they were discussing weekend plans. "What did you have in mind?" Victoria turned to Elena. "You come with me willingly. No struggle, no drama, no tearful goodbyes. In exchange, I let everyone else in this room live." "And the baby?" Elena asked. "Will be raised as my own child, loved, educated, given every advantage money can provide." Victoria's voice turned almost tender. "A much better life than growing up in this." She gestured dismissively at the modest surroundings. The worn furniture Rosa had bought secondhand, the carefully tended but simple decor, the family photos documenting years of quiet happiness achieved without wealth or status. "You think money makes a good mother?" Rosa asked mildly. "Money makes everything easier, including motherhood." Victoria's mask slipped slightly, revealing the bitterness beneath her polished surface. "I could have given children everything. The best schools, travel, opportunities Elena never dreamed of. But Damien decided I wasn't worthy of motherhood because my body couldn't produce his precious genetic legacy." The pain in Victoria's voice was real, Elena realized. Beneath the obsession and manipulation was a woman who genuinely wanted to be a mother, who'd had that possibility taken away by biological reality and her husband's coldness. "I'm sorry," Elena said quietly. "I'm sorry you couldn't have children. I'm sorry Damien hurt you. But taking my baby won't fix any of that." "Won't it?" Victoria leaned forward, her eyes blazing with desperate hunger. "I'll be the mother I was always meant to be. Your child will want for nothing, except its real family," Marcus interrupted from his position near the back window. "Except the people who would die to protect it." Victoria's expression hardened. "Sentiment. The child will adapt as children do. Within a year, it won't even remember you existed." Elena felt her baby kick, as if responding to Victoria's words. Strong, healthy movements that reminded her of everything she'd endured to protect this life growing inside her. "There's just one problem with your plan," Elena said. "What's that, sweetie?" Elena stood slowly, her hands resting on her rounded belly. "I'm not going anywhere with you." Victoria's composure finally cracked completely. Her face twisted with rage as she reached into her purse, but her movement was too slow, too obvious. Rosa's coffee cup shattered against Victoria's wrist, sending the gun skittering across the hardwood floor. Before Victoria could recover, Elena threw herself sideways behind the couch, shouting warnings to the others. The living room exploded into chaos. Victoria's backup team moved in through the windows as gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Elena crawled behind Rosa's old couch, pressing herself as low as possible while her baby moved frantically in response to her terror. Through the noise and confusion, she heard Victoria screaming. Not words, just raw fury and frustration at seeing her perfect plan dissolve into violence. Marcus appeared beside Elena, his face grim but determined. "Back bedroom, now." They crawled through the hallway as bullets shattered picture frames and family memories around them. Elena's childhood home was being destroyed by the same obsession that had already claimed so many other women's lives. In Rosa's bedroom, Damien was helping Elena's mother barricade the door with furniture, while sirens wailed in the distance. "Torres!" Elena gasped. "Tracking our phones," Damien confirmed, "but I don't know if they'll get here in time." The gunfire outside was intensifying. Victoria's team was professional, but they were also fighting in an unfamiliar neighborhood against local police who knew every street and alley. Elena pressed her hands to her belly, feeling her baby's frantic movements. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry you have to go through this. Don't apologize, Rosa said firmly, reloading her late husband's old revolver with hands that barely shook. You didn't choose any of this. The bedroom door exploded inward. Victoria stood in the doorway, her designer clothes torn, blood streaming from cuts on her face where Rosa's coffee cup had found its mark. She looked like a avenging angel twisted by madness, beautiful and terrible, and completely beyond reason. You stupid, ungrateful little girl, she snarled, raising the gun she'd retrieved from the living room. I offered you everything. Money, security, a life your baby could never have with you. I already have everything I need, Elena replied. Victoria's finger tightened on the trigger, but she never got the chance to fire. Rosa Vasquez, who'd spent her whole life protecting her daughter from poverty, prejudice, and now this final, most terrible threat, stepped between Victoria and Elena with the calm determination of a woman who'd already survived cancer and wasn't afraid of anything else life could throw at her. The gunshot was deafeningly loud in the small bedroom. Rosa crumpled, but her sacrifice had given Damien the split second he needed. He tackled Victoria from behind, and they went down together in a tangle of desperate violence. Elena knelt beside her mother, pressing her hands against the spreading stain on Rosa's chest, while her baby kicked frantically, as if trying to escape the womb that had become a battlefield. Mom, stay with me, Elena whispered. Rosa's eyes found her daughter's face. Take care of my grandbaby, she said simply. The bedroom filled with FBI agents as Victoria and Damien's fight ended with Victoria unconscious and Damien bleeding from deep scratches across his face and arms. Agent Torres knelt beside Rosa, her hands joining Elena's in trying to stem the bleeding. Ambulance is 3 minutes out. But Elena could see it in Torres's eyes, in the way Rosa's breathing was becoming shallow and irregular. Her mother, who'd fought cancer, who'd worked 3 jobs to raise Elena alone, who'd faced down a killer to protect her grandchild, was dying. I love you, Mom, Elena whispered. Love you too, mija. Both of you. Rosa's hand found Elena's belly one last time, feeling the strong movements of the life she'd died to protect. As the paramedics arrived and Victoria was loaded into a federal transport vehicle, Elena held her mother's hand and made a silent promise. This child would know about Rosa Vasquez, about her strength, her sacrifice, her unwavering love. Victoria's obsession had finally ended, but the cost would stay with Elena forever. 6 months later, Elena stood in the nursery of her new apartment, painting delicate butterflies on the walls, while morning sunlight streamed through windows that faced a quiet park where children played. Her belly was round and full, the baby due any day, according to Dr. Chen's calculations. The apartment was modest but comfortable, nothing like Victoria's opulent estate, but it was theirs. Elena had insisted on paying her own rent with money from the Victim Compensation Fund, refusing Damien's offers of financial support even as their relationship had evolved into something neither of them could have predicted. You're nesting, Damien observed from the doorway, his arms full of groceries and his expression softer than she'd ever seen during their contract days. Elena smiled. Dr. Chen says it's normal. The baby's getting ready. Their relationship had changed in ways that still surprised them both. The contract that had brought them together was null and void, invalidated by Victoria's crimes in the FBI investigation. But what had grown between them during those terrifying months was real, born not from obligation or payment, but from shared survival and genuine care. I brought those prenatal vitamins you actually asked for, he said, setting the bags on the small kitchen counter. The ones that don't contain sedatives. Elena laughed, but the sound carried echoes of everything they'd survived together. Even her humor was different now, harder earned, more precious. Damien moved closer, his hand hovering near her belly, in the careful way he'd adopted since learning to ask permission rather than assume ownership. When she nodded, he placed his palm against the spot where their baby was currently practicing what felt like soccer kicks. Strong, he murmured, wonder still evident in his voice after months of these moments. Stubborn, Elena corrected, just like all of us. She'd thought carefully about the word us, not just her and the baby, but the family they'd chosen rather than the one circumstances had thrust upon them. Damien, who transformed from a cold businessman into someone capable of genuine protection and care. Marcus, who visited twice a week and had quietly become the uncle their child would need. Even Agent Torres, who'd become a close friend and honorary aunt. "There's something I need to tell you," Elena said, settling into the rocking chair Damien had insisted on, despite her protests about expense. His face tensed with the reflexive worry that had become his default expression since Victoria's final attack. "What is it?" Elena had wrestled with this revelation for weeks, ever since Dr. Chen's latest round of tests had revealed something that changed the entire foundation of their story. The paternity results came back with some unexpected information. Damien went very still. "Unexpected how?" "The artificial insemination didn't work." Elena watched emotions flicker across his features. Confusion, disappointment, then something that looked almost like relief. "This baby isn't biologically yours." The silence stretched between them while Damien processed this news that rewrote everything they thought they knew about their situation. "Then whose?" He trailed off as understanding dawned. "Remember that night Marcus came to warn me at the estate? When Victoria's guards took him away, but not before." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "The timeline matches. Dr. Chen thinks the stress of the procedures caused my body to reject the artificial insemination, but then nature found its own way." "Marcus," Damien said quietly. "He doesn't know yet. I haven't told him." Elena's hands moved protectively over her belly. "I don't even know how to tell him. This wasn't planned, wasn't part of anyone's grand design. It just happened." Damien sat heavily in the chair across from her, processing this final twist in a story that had already taken more turns than any of them could have anticipated. The child he'd paid $7 million to create wasn't his genetic heir after all. It was his nephew or niece, conceived during a moment of human connection in the midst of Victoria's clinical nightmare. "Does it matter?" he asked finally. "What do you mean?" "Whether the baby shares my DNA or Marcus's, whether it's my biological child or my brother's." Damien leaned forward, his gray eyes more alive than she'd ever seen them. "This child is going to be born into a family that fought hell itself to protect it. Biology is just genetics. Love is what makes a family." Elena's eyes filled with tears at the simple truth of it. After months of being treated like a vessel for someone else's genetic ambitions, the idea that family was about choice rather than DNA felt revolutionary. "You mean that?" "I mean that if you'll have me, not as the baby's biological father, not as the man who hired you, but as someone who wants to spend his life making sure you both feel safe and loved, then nothing else matters." Before Elena could respond, a sharp contraction seized her abdomen. She gasped, gripping the arms of the rocking chair as pain radiated through her lower back. "Elena?" Damien was beside her instantly. "I think..." Another contraction, stronger and more focused than the practice ones she'd been experiencing for weeks. "I think it's time." As they rushed to gather the hospital bag and call Dr. Chen, Elena realized the perfect symmetry of the moment. Her baby was choosing to be born just as they'd finally understood what family really meant. Not the contracts and obligations that had started their story, but the love and loyalty that would finish it. 4 hours later, in a delivery room surrounded by their chosen family, Damien holding one hand, Marcus gripping the other after Damien had quietly explained the paternity situation, Agent Torres providing moral support, and a framed photo of Rosa watching over them all. Elena brought her daughter into the world. The baby emerged screaming with healthy indignation, her tiny fists waving as if she were ready to fight anyone who threatened her family. Dr. Chen pronounced her perfect, completely normal, unmodified by Victoria's failed experiments. Exactly what she was supposed to be. As Elena held her daughter for the first time, she looked up at the two brothers flanking her bed. Marcus, whose gentle protection had saved them all, and whose genetic legacy this child would carry. Damien, whose transformation from cold businessman to devoted guardian had surprised everyone, including himself. "What will you name her?" Dr. Chen asked. Chorna. Elena looked at the tiny face nestled against her chest, then at the people who had become her family through fire and blood, and choice rather than law or biology. "Hope," she said simply. "Her name is Hope Rosa Cross Vasquez." The combination of names told their story. Hope for what they'd found together. Rosa for the grandmother who died protecting her. Cross for the father who'd chosen love over genetics. Vasquez for the mother who'd survived everything Victoria could devise. Because after everything they'd endured, hope was what had survived. Hope was what had grown between Elena and Damien, transforming a business transaction into something real. Hope was what had driven Marcus to risk everything to protect them. Hope was what had given Rosa the courage to stand between a gun and her daughter's future. And hope was what would guide them forward into whatever came next. As Elena settled into her new life, no longer the desperate young woman who'd signed a devil's bargain, but a mother surrounded by love she'd never dared to dream possible, she realized that sometimes the most beautiful families are forged in the worst circumstances. Victoria had tried to buy, steal, and manipulate the perfect child. Instead, she had helped create something far more valuable, a perfect family built on choice, sacrifice, and unshakable love. Elena stood at her apartment window, baby Hope balanced on her hip, watching Damien and Marcus build a swing set in the courtyard below, while Rosa's spirit seemed to guide their efforts through Elena's amused commentary. The late afternoon sun painted everything golden, and Hope babbled happily at her uncle's construction project. "Your grandmother would have loved this chaos," Elena murmured to her daughter, who responded by grabbing her mother's hair and laughing. Through the open window came the sound of Damien cursing creatively at the swing set instructions, while Marcus suggested increasingly unhelpful solutions. Their relationship had healed in ways that caring for Hope had made possible. Shared midnight feedings, diaper changes, and the simple joy of watching a child discover the world had given them common ground beyond their painful family history. Agent Torres appeared in the courtyard with coffee and donuts, officially off duty but never quite able to stop checking on the family she'd helped save. She'd become Hope's fierce protector and Elena's closest friend. Proof that some bonds are forged in crisis and strengthened by choice. The doorbell rang. Elena opened it to find a delivery person with a small package addressed to Hope Cross Vasquez with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. Victoria in her prison uniform, older now, gray threading through her blonde hair. On the back, in careful handwriting, "Some things can never be taken away. Love is one of them." A friend. Elena looked at the photograph for a long moment, then filed it away in Hope's baby book. Her daughter would need to know this story someday. All of it. Including the woman whose obsession had inadvertently brought together the family that now surrounded Hope with unbreakable love. Because Victoria had been wrong about one crucial thing. Love couldn't be bought, stolen, or controlled. It could only be chosen again and again by people brave enough to build something beautiful from the ashes of something terrible. And in that choice, Elena had found not just survival, but the kind of happiness that made every moment of their nightmare worthwhile. The swing set collapsed with a tremendous crash, followed by creative cursing in 2 different languages. Hope clapped her hands with delight, and Elena laughed until tears ran down her cheeks. Tears of joy, finally, instead of fear.